Right then, let's talk about the Titanic. This wasn't just some boat, this was the boat. Imagine a massive floating city, decked out to the nines, full of posh folks and enough champagne to fill a swimming pool. That was the dream anyway.
The fellas who dreamt this up? White Star Line, they were called. Bigwigs in the ship game. They wanted to blow everyone out of the water, literally. They wanted the biggest, fastest, fanciest ship ever. And boy, did they try. They weren't messing about. This ship was going to be longer than a street, taller than Big Ben, and fancier than a sheik's bathroom. I mean, carpets so plush you'd lose a small dog in them.
Now everyone remembers how that turned out, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before the iceberg, before the drama, there was the small matter of actually building the thing. And that, my friends, is a story in itself.
Now, building a ship like the Titanic wasn't like popping down to the local boatyard for a new dinghy. This was a proper undertaking, years in the making. We're talking thousands of workers, millions of rivets, and enough steel to make a small country nervous.
It all started in Belfast, Ireland, at the Harland and Wolff shipyard. Picture the scene, a muddy field one day, a hive of activity the next. Cranes swinging, hammers banging, blokes shouting. It'd be enough to give the health and safety inspector a heart attack today.
They started with the keel, the backbone of the ship. This thing was enormous, laid out on a slipway that sloped down to the water like a giant slide. Then, piece by piece, they started adding the ribs, the plates, the decks, all held together with millions of those rivets I mentioned earlier. And let me tell you, putting in those rivets was a proper job. Imagine hammering red-hot metal all day long, the clang echoing in your ears. Makes changing a tyre look like a day at the spa, doesn't it? Now, shipyards back then were like secret societies. They had their own ways of doing things, passed down through generations. Some of it was genius, some of it was downright balmy, and most of it involved a good deal of luck.
Take caulking, for example. This is the process of sealing the gaps between the planks of wood on the deck so no water gets in. Now, you'd think they'd use some fancy sealant, right? Nope. They used old-fashioned oakum, basically. Bits of rope soaked in tar. And how did they shove it in the gaps? With a caulking iron and a big hammer, of course.
Then there were the launching ceremonies. They didn't just push the boat in the water. Oh no, they'd have a big to-do, with champagne bottles smashed against the hull, dignitaries making speeches, and the whole shipyard holding its breath. You see, if the ship didn't slide down the slipway properly, it could be a disaster. Imagine a giant metal bathtub getting stuck halfway down a hill. Not pretty.
Section 4. Titanic's hidden quirks, oddities, and fun facts. Right, now for some juicy tidbits about the Titanic itself. Did you know, for instance, that the ship had its own newspaper? The Atlantic Daily Bulletin, it was called, printed right there on board. Talk about keeping up with current events. And get this, the Titanic had only one bathtub for all those third-class passengers. One bathtub! Imagine the queue for that. Makes Glastonbury look like a private spa, doesn't it? Then there was the swimming pool. Yes, you heard that right, a swimming pool on a ship. Of course, it was only for the first-class passengers. Those lads had all the fun. Still, can you imagine the looks on the faces of the folks back home when they heard about that? A swimming pool on a boat? Those posh folks have lost the plot. And here's a funny one. The Titanic's fourth funnel? Totally fake. It was just stuck on for show to make the ship look even bigger and more impressive. Talk about style over substance.
Section 5, the legend endures Titanic's grip on history. Well, we all know how the story ends. The unsinkable ship met its match in an iceberg, and the rest, as they say, is history. But here's the thing, the Titanic story didn't end that night. Oh no, the Titanic became a legend. It's a story that's been told and retold in books, films, songs, even stage shows. Everyone's got their own idea about what happened that night and what lessons we should learn. Was it hubris, bad luck, or maybe just a dodgy rivet somewhere? Whatever the reason, the Titanic continues to fascinate us. It's a reminder of our own mortality, I suppose, and the awesome power of nature. Plus, let's be honest, it's a cracking good yarn.
Section 6. A final thought, unsinkable in our imagination. So there you have it, a little peek behind the curtain of the Titanic. It was a marvel of engineering, a floating palace, and ultimately a tragic reminder that even the grandest of schemes can come unstuck. But you know what they say, Better to have built and sunk than never to have built at all, right? Just imagine if they'd known about stabilizers back then. Might have saved everyone a lot of bother.